Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today, and I am stoked for this one, and I hope you are too. You should be liking the show, subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, doing all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. Now, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show. And of course, if you have not yet, make sure you are signed up for the Reinforcement Loop. That is our weekly newsletter that goes out every Sunday, gives you a little bit of information on what is going on with the show, as well as a little bit of brain candy for you to chew on. And if you have not signed up for that yet, I'm just going to say it, you're wrong. Get signed up for it. It's good information. Other than that, we got Seb joining us again, which is always a pleasure. Shaun, we're going to be talking about the skill paradox. But before we do that, I want to check in with you guys. How's it going, Seb, down in Southern Alberta?
Yeah, things are good, man. Lots. There's about 8 zillion flies in my office. Hopefully you can't hear that.
Hopefully it doesn't fly away on you.
Welcome to log cabin life.
That's life in the country right there. Shaun, how's the mountains treating you?
Well, better flies than frozen flies. So, take what you get. It's good to see Seb on the podcast, of course, and looking forward to the topic at hand. It could go in a number of different directions, but I just do want to establish right from the get-go that if we're talking about the paradox of skill, is that what we're referring to? Mm-hmm. Obviously, the podcast is a great proxy for that conversation. Our own lives, the three of us, our lives are a great proxy for this topic. We could academically tear it apart, intellectually tear it apart. We could refer to third parties to tear it apart. So there's many different ways that this topic could go, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a gooder. It's been on my list of things to bring up, my topics to bring up for quite a while, and I've been just trying to find the right crew to put it with, because this is a really interesting conversation to begin with. So let's go around, get some first thoughts. Seb, I'm going to hit you. What was your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I knew very little about what the subject was going to be or what we're launching into, and I think I like to keep it that way most times, and just so it opens up some more what I perceive to be more organic sort of openers, but after hearing the original sort of short conversation we had in the green room, it had me thinking and applying that concept to a variety of different things. The first thing that I thought about was hands and feet skills, of course, because that's the first thing and the simplest things to relate to. But definitely it can be applied to a whole bunch. What's going on with my camera? It can be applied to a variety of other It finally picked up the fact that my face shouldn't be shown publicly. That's probably what's happening here.
Exactly. Got to hide it from the rest of the world.
It's like, ew, what is this? Gross.
Maybe it's all the white in your beard. That could be it.
Yep, it very much could be. But yeah, just trying to make some correlation to where exactly a concept like this would be applicable, and I'm realizing that it's applicable pretty much everywhere. But the second thing that came to mind is the fact that as human beings, I find a lot of the times we are attempting to preserve what it is that we are doing and the way that we are doing it by preventing any sort of glory or what's the word? Credit to somebody doing it differently. And so I think that our first knee-jerk reaction sometimes is to have a knee-jerk reaction to things that potentially change things. There's two things that humans don't like: the way things are and change. And it really seems to sometimes become quite apparent when somebody introduces a concept that perhaps is challenging the status quo, so to speak. So, interesting conversation we'll have for sure.
I dig it. Shaun, what's your first thoughts?
My first thoughts is I like to play with status quo. So let's play with that. So, Chance, what are your thoughts on what Seb just said?
Oh, he's turning it back on me. I see how it is.
Reverse Uno.
Reverse Uno. The my first thoughts on this were, I find it quite interesting that as technology develops, it becomes a bit of a cheat code. And even outside of technology, we have as we find efficiencies, it seems like a shortcut to the original path. So if I wanted to, say, study a martial art, and I spend all my money on getting private lessons from the best teachers, and I get my black belt faster than everybody else, a lot of other black belts would look at that as cheating. Like, you're not doing the whole traditional sequence of the time and space to develop the skill. But if you have the opportunity to utilize a new technology or a new way of thinking or a new way of doing something, as an early adopter, you can get in on the ground floor, for lack of a better term. So it gives you perhaps a leg up into the next transition, that next level of technology, that next level of skill set, or that change of things. So I got lots of really interesting questions, but I'm going to throw it back at you, Shaun. Now, what do you think?
I think I like it. Obviously the way you took that, it opens my mind to a bunch of different directions that we could go. And I want to come back to that, but maybe a little bit later, because of course there is an individual in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu world, Derek, last name is unimportant. He just, he got his black belt in about 3-ish years. And there was a lot of BJJ celebrities that kind of not aligned with him, but were in his satellite, in his periphery, that were kind of, to some degree, providing a little bit of credibility, not credibility, but a little bit of attachment to what he was doing, though it wasn't an attachment of authority, or it wasn't an attachment of we endorse this individual. It was simply an attachment that was more of a commercial arrangement than it was a professional or a personal relationship. And so, Chance, I want to come back to that maybe later, because Seb had brought up the idea of hands and feet skills, and how, the paradigm of skill is what we're talking about to some degree. And so 10 minutes before we came into this into this recorded podcast, I was down on the heavy bag. And in fact, Chance, I added you at the collective, I believe, as to me being on the heavy bag just before the podcast. And so here's the paradox of skill that I want to establish for everyone else to kind of think about a little bit. I've got a number of skills, and hands and skills are one of those skills. Podcasting is another one of those skills. Photography is another one of those skills. Videography is another one of those skills. And all of those skills are at different levels. My podcasting maybe is better than my hands and feet. I don't know. Or maybe my podcasting is better than I don't know which way it is, but they're not all on the same level. They're all different levels. And by combining those 4 things together, my skill set is enhanced, even though the paradox is there are skills that I feel really comfortable and confident with, and there are skills that make me feel like a raging imposter and that I shouldn't even be doing what I'm doing right now. So as I was filming that stuff this morning, and it's just a one and doneer, where I walk up to the heavy bag, zap it with a sidekick, and then walk back upstairs and start my life in podcasting. As I was doing that, there was a time in the past I wouldn't have been able to do it quite like I do it now, because I've settled into my rhythm. I've kind of started to own the combined skill sets that I did this morning. But a year ago, I was super uncomfortable. Even though I had the skills, I hadn't managed to align them all. I hadn't managed to synthesize them into a more complete skill set, for lack of a better term. And so you can have skills that you have spent many years working on that are now in the bag. And there's a paradox in that. But then when you start combining skills, there is another paradox on the combinative effect of skills. And so that's not what I was thinking this morning when I was zapping that heavy bag. It's what I'm thinking now in this podcast, which in and of itself is a skill. The paradox of taking your day and considering it through a different lens to come up with new ideas right now. So there you go. That's my first thoughts.
I dig it. Seb, you got any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, this had me thinking about, deconstruction. So I guess let me backtrack a bit. One of the life skill, quote unquote, that I love to work on is, trade crafts when it comes to going out in the woods and doing certain things like hiking and exploring and those types of things. And one of the things that I love to do, and I haven't done it in a while, but when I do, I always really enjoy it, is to take whatever my favorite hike of the day, of the time, of the month, of the year is, and do it at night. Because it's a completely different ball game to do it at night. And deconstructing what it is that the experience is about. And what I find, and, I've had people ask me, like, why would you do that? Why would you ever hike at night? And there's so much value in that you're connecting with the experience in a completely different way. And so it's perhaps a little less cognitive, a little less visual, a little bit more auditory, a little bit more sort of intuitive, all of those things. So now you're engaging these realms that are generally being sort of superseded by certain, perhaps, certain senses, like just because of they're readily available and it's just right there. Whereas looking at something that you are doing, that you are very proficient at, in disabling to a certain degree some of the primary senses that you normally engage in the experience, really changes the experience altogether. And what it does do, it creates a renewed appreciation for this senses that you disengage, and that in itself brings a certain amount of gratitude in relation to something that perhaps now you have taken for granted because you've done it so much. This is kind of what came to mind as I was hearing this.
I dig it. I wrote down different perceptive realms, and doing things in the dark is great. I really like to do things with my eyes closed. That's where I do this quite often, where in BJJ, I'll roll with my eyes closed on a pretty regular basis. I've started skipping with my eyes closed, which is another realm as well. I started playing my guitar with my eyes closed, just trying to find a new way to feel and utilize the skill in a different way. So especially with my guitar, your fingers have to know where they go when you change from chord to chord to chord. But not only that, the way in which I hold my guitar changes, and the way in which I strum changes, because I have to rely on timing and beat rather than visually watching my hand come up and down, right? So, or visually knowing where I'm going to put my hands next. And I think this is a great angle in this, that, to Shaun's point, you can have a skill set that you think is pretty solid. I got this on lockdown. And then you change one sort of perceptory realm, all of a sudden you can't see, and it changes that skill completely. You have to, not completely, but you have to then reassess how you manage that skill. Shaun, what do you got?
So I believe it was just yesterday that I put up a post, and it showed me zapping the heavy bag in a pile of different ways, mostly punching, but there's some other stuff in there where I'm using a stick and where I'm using finger guns. Not really, but Chance, I don't know if you got to see that, or if Seb got to see it, but like some of those things that I'm doing are moving pretty quick, and to the casual eye, they might not understand what is going on. But I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. What I'm doing in that video yesterday is for me, for Shaun to reanalyze how he moves at about 240 frames per second. I can see the errors or the problems in my movement pattern. So it's up there for me, but it's also for other people to either enjoy or to learn. Now, as you'll see, or if you saw that, Chance or Seb, when I'm punching the bag, like what I was exploring in that moment was physics. And I believe my post was very simple. It was just a single sentence, and it was along the lines of something to do with playing with physics, the variables. There's so many ways to do something. I'm just playing with variables. That's all. And so some of the punches, both feet are on the ground. Wham! And then some of the punches, I literally jump up in the air so that I'm completely ungrounded and completely destabilized. And then wham! Still hit it like flying in the air in a really awkward position. What I'm doing in that video is pushing my boundaries. Pushing, we'll call it the laws of physics as I understand it. I've been playing with physics on the hands and feet skill for a long time. It doesn't mean I'm good. It just means I've played with it a long time. And I've really, really, really put a lot of my life into studying the physics of it. I'm not saying that I've spent all my life. I'm just saying a lot of my life has been spent studying physics. And I like to bend physics. I'm not trying to break the laws of physics because I don't think we can break it, but I do feel we can bend it. It's like the Matrix, you know, the spoon. Is there a spoon?
No spoon?
There we go. So that's what I do when I'm on the bag downstairs. But like anyone who watches that casually won't see any of that. They won't see the skills involved in playing with the variables of physics. So it's on the eye of the beholder. And so if Seb is doing anything, if Chance is doing anything, if I'm doing anything, your interpretation of what is being done in this moment, what is being done in this podcast right now, your interpretation will decide the level of skill that it's being done at. And your context of what skill is only based on your exposure to the pre-skills. So if you've never seen podcasting before, we probably look pretty good right now. But if you've seen a lot of podcasts, we probably look like maybe 5 out of 10 to you. And so skills are based on context to the viewer. Skills for us are based on our own context on how much we push the envelope. So if I go back 30 years, I probably think I'm pretty good at martial arts. But I move forward 30 years, I look back and I think, I wasn't that good at all. And so skills are contextual, not only within ourselves, but through the eye of the beholder. That's the point I'd like to make right now.
Ooh, I dig it. Seb, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I always love to play with this angle where we get to introspect and dive in to see what it is that makes us react a certain way and how can we do it better. And I'll go back to the example that you used earlier about the black belt. So when did it become you need to have black belt skills to be a black belt? It took me 10 years, so why would it take you 3? And I think that and I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that there is no value in the 10-year crucible, and that speeding things up is necessarily efficiency augmenting, because it's getting to an outcome faster isn't necessarily 100% correlated to the efficiencies that led there. There's a variety of other reasons, other factors that may influence that. So you can't say for sure, or it's very difficult to say for sure that person is 3 times better than that person, and that's the reason why they are now having their black belts 3 times faster, right? And so I think it's interesting to see how, as individuals, how we react when things are coming up. And I call those daily traps, where you find yourself judging all of a sudden, and you realize, what am I doing, and why am I judging, and why do I care, about this, and how it conflicts with perhaps some version of reality that I've crafted for myself, and thinking, because really, when you think about it, and if you're being cognitively engaged in this, and if you're being sort of rational about it, you either have black belt skills or you don't. I don't care how long it took you to get there. Like, if you are a year practitioner that's trained 3 times a day, 7 days a week for a year, and you are an absolute black belt in skill set, what is this? And I understand that there's, minimum times and all the things. I'm taking all the constraints away here, all the imposed constraints that are essentially preventing people from acing something faster than you. So we just set up some rules. But what is the outcome? you know. And so now let's take this and transpose this to another realm. And we we're having this conversation earlier. So now you have, with the integration of AI, you have obviously academics that are developing their papers, their PhD papers. There's all kinds of ways to do that. And what we are talking about is the ability to correlate what it is that you've created using a bit of efficient technology and some know-how with your ability to be the person that's conveying the message. And how now what needs to happen, because you've articulated yourself so well, is you actually need to elevate your own skill set, because you can pass by without ever being challenged, but that is absolutely impossible if you encounter any measure of success. So if you have no success whatsoever, nobody will know any better. But once you are being challenged professionally or personally or otherwise, you are going to have to live up to whatever it is that you quote unquote increase efficiency on. And so now what we're looking at let me sort of counter this argument on my own.
So it's good, right? So it's good, and I'm glad that you're going to counter it, because of course there is an obvious counter. But your comment was a freaking lightning bolt with a thunderclap so far.
For sure. So now imagine if you say have a mediocre paper that you've spent the time writing and all of the things, and now nobody has ever been interested in challenging you on it. You could also have less skills and have written a paper on your own, and they will not be exposed, or you will not expose yourself, or you will not be aware of that shortcoming on account of the fact that this was never challenged, because there was never grounds to challenge. Now think about this, how paradoxical this is, because all of these people that are coming out of the woodwork to challenge you when you're being successful, it's their own demons that makes that happen, right? Unless you make some really outlandish claims that they think that professionally or academically they can refute. The idea is now they got poked because somebody is actually successful. So the same mechanisms that sends us in these loops is the same mechanisms that send the collective in the loops as soon as somebody has some degree of success. And it's kind of like a big vicious cycle. It's just a strange human thing.
I really dig this. And I wrote down, we're gatekeeping our own context, really, at the root of this. And one of the things that clicked into my head was when I first got in the Army, we were just transitioning to the LCAN optics. And so I went and did a PWT shoot, just a general, like the level 1 where you're just hitting targets at 100 meters. And I was much better with the iron sights because that's what I grew up with. I've shot irons throughout my whole life up until I joined the military. And then I started using optics. And then I was like, I don't really like these optics. But they give me magnification. I can hit targets a little bit better from closer ranges, et cetera, et cetera. They give you advantages that you can use. But I heard a lot of the older guys, when the optics came into play, that they're like, that's cheating. That doesn't count. This isn't, you're not a marksman until you're a marksman on iron sights. Things like that, where it requires you to go to a traditionalist view of a particular skill set, that it has to be done that way because I did it that way. And if you don't live up to my standards, then you don't count. Which, to your point, Seb, again, it goes back to your own demons. It goes back to your own ego. It goes to your own ability to see your skill sets in its own context, let alone against somebody else's. Which, this is fascinating already. Shaun, what are you thinking? I can see you got something.
I got so much, but I'm going to try to stick with what you just said, which is good. It's legit for sure. But how about this? So, you get your Alcan, and you don't like it because you're an iron sight shooter. And then you look to the guy to your left and say, yeah, I don't really like this. It's not really working for me, this newfangled thing. I'm a better shot on iron sights. Oh yeah, are you a marksman? No, I am. And I also like the LCAN. And so you can have that conversation. So what I'm suggesting is that, and I'm not stating that's what I've ever said to anyone. What I am suggesting is that irrespective of what an individual says, if they make a claim like, I'm a subject matter expert in this, and therefore that doesn't work, if you can then look them in the eye and say, interesting, I'm pretty good on iron sights myself, but I also like optics. Now you've got a more three-dimensional conversation because you're establishing that you're both SMEs on iron sights and that at least one of us, me, has kept an open mind to optics, whereas the other person, you, has not. And that makes for an interesting conversation. And so the paradox of skills, as I was trying to allude to earlier, is not just a one skill thing. This morning I put a few skills together that I'm not great at all of them all on the same level. I'm mediocre in some, better in others. And that is skills, man. Once you pluralize skill, the paradox of skill, if it's the paradox of skills, it's almost an entirely different conversation with certain people, where they will come in with their one skill and feel that their one skill universally applies to all of life, and therefore they can make bold claims as to something they know nothing about, and it might be optics. And so that is a more fundamental human characteristic. The idea that the moment that you know one thing, you know everything. You know what I'm saying?
So, what do you got, Seb? What do you got?
Just very briefly, I mean, this brings in the essentially the bias-induced dogma, and this is one of the things that I'm not suggesting that I've never done it. I'm suggesting that I'm consistently scanning the horizon to see if I am. And if I write something or if I say something, I try to keep it in a way that they're always going to be outlier. They're always a possibility of things not working in that way, right? But bias is an incredibly hard thing to get over, or dogma, bias-induced dogma. So it can be very hard to get over if we don't have the ability to get over ourselves. That is what the problem is, ultimately, fundamentally. And so it's an interesting conversation to have, and the conversation is less about, is the LCAN better than this, but why am I entrenched in a certain thought process because I'm struggling at something new? Because that should be a sort of the alarm bells, or at least something to indicate, like, look, there's something uncomfortable here, which means that I absolutely now have to be really good with the LCAN. How that happens is totally up to me. And so I think there's two ways that this could go, and there's probably more than that, but there's two broad ways that this could go. I either shut myself to the opportunity of developing further on account of having made a decision on what this does or doesn't do for me, or I keep an open mind and have the potential to reach new milestones in different things on account of keeping myself under control.
So how much of this then plays into the concept of standing on the shoulders of giants is what kicks into my head? Is that, like, let's say I can shoot well with iron sights. Great. That means that if I just learned on iron sights with a modern rifle, that's great for me. I have a skill set. And then, yes, the next skill set of optics makes it more challenging, but I'm not learning how to shoot a muzzle loader. I'm not learning how to shoot a bow and arrow. I'm not learning how to shoot or throw a spear. I'm not like it depends
Why?
how far back you go. Why?
Yeah.
Why am I not doing it specifically?
Yeah.
Well, because the way I look at it is they're not useful in my situation, what I'm using it for.
You're right. They're not useful until your weapon runs out of ammo and all you have is a spear.
Yep.
And of course we can extrapolate and go back in time and apply this backwards to a variety of different things. And to a certain extent, what we're lacking in some instances eventually is time, right? We understand that. So I'm being unreasonable with what I'm saying here, but there really isn't any reason why, if the opportunity presents itself, that I wouldn't want to learn that. If somebody came and said, hey, I have a muzzle loader, would you like to learn how to operate one, or a musket? Man, I'd be all over that. Like, why not? Wouldn't that be a cool thing? And think about it from an historical perspective. Think about it from standing on the shoulders of giants. Now you are replicating some of their movements, and very infinitesimally, obviously, and much less dangerous circumstances, but you are still getting a piece of that action. Like, why is it that we always tend to move forward only to circle completely back to the original, and in between there was never a look back? So we advance until we're starting exactly where we came from. That's why everything is cyclical, because we consistently do that. I think that if there is an opportunity, and when we stand on the shoulders of giants, that means that we should be seeking to elevate from where they were, but that's not to say eliminate what they were and where they were. It just simply means that we can move the needle, continue moving the needle in a way that's very positive and congruent to the way that they move the needle at their own time with their own specific set of challenges. So my answer to this is, man, if the opportunity is there and the time is there and the interest is there, why wouldn't you learn to shoot a bow? Why wouldn't you learn all these things?
I'm all down with that. I agree. If the time and availability is there, for sure, but they're not prerequisites to learn the newer skill. And I think this is where the challenge is for some people, is that because I learned on iron sights, I think everyone else should learn on iron sights, but it's not a prerequisite, because somebody previous to me would have been like, oh, well, you're using a friggin' barreled rifle. Learn how to shoot on a smoothbore before you learn how to use a rifled barrel. You know what I mean? Like, they're not prerequisites for the skill set, yet they would be an additional bonus to have the skill set.
Well, just quickly, I'll be devil's advocate again on this one. And just because of this very reason, now you're talking in an addition, which is actually a separate piece from the weapon system, right? So now you're at the mercy of the optics going down. What happens if that optic goes down? Your contingency is the iron sights. So it would make sense fundamentally to be able to shoot with iron sights as good as you are with the optics, and then put an optic on, right? Instead of doing it the other way around. I made some changes to some of the protocols when it came to training people to do muscle ups, for example. So for those that don't know, when you train muscle ups, there's gymnastic movements which is being completely obliterated by people that don't understand, say, the kip. So kipping in CrossFit, for example, is actually a gymnastics movement. This is not a CrossFit movement. It's a gymnastics movement, and it serves the purpose of transitioning from one place to another, and it serves the purpose of doing it properly under tension with the right amount of core, density and core engagement, all of those things. And so, yes, it is taken out of context and done all kinds of weird ways, and we're gonna leave it at that. However, there used to be a time where athletes would be brought into a CrossFit gym, not a gymnastics gym, and they would be taught to kip so that they could start doing pull-ups. Well, my experience over the course of 10 years of having different gyms is that these people were hardly ever capable of doing muscle ups. Whereas if we took somebody and said, listen, we're not going to teach the kip, all we're going to do is we're going to build a strength base. Okay, so you're going to do strict pull-ups at every single workout, even if that means using a band and doing all of the things to help yourself, take some of the load off. But you're going to do strict pull-ups for as long as you can, and then you're going to use your band, do whatever. And so what we ended up doing is making sure that people had a certain amount of pull-ups, say 10, 12 strict pull-ups, before we started introducing them to the kip in a way that was controlled with the right core engagement and the right mechanics, so that they could get into a muscle up position using the transition, right? And so I think that there is a lot of when something new comes out, or when something that's exciting comes out, we tend as humans to seek instant gratification on the very context that we're engaged in. That means I want to be able to shoot targets well right now. And I got an LCAN and I can do that. I want to be able to kip and do all the workouts and have some great times on my workouts. But fundamentally, I'm doing it wrong, and it's going to take me longer. And if anything happens, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of people get injured, like shoulder injuries and all kinds of other injuries, because they don't have the strength muscle base to sustain the highly dynamic movements that they're doing. They're basically loose, right? There's no real oomph there to keep them together, and so they break easy. So I digress here, but we're kind of comparing apple and oranges, because you're talking about something that you can, and it's historically it's happened over and over again on operation and whatever. You will lose your LCAN. That's a fact. So now say if you lost your Elcan and all that meant is that you would do one less pull-up, we wouldn't have an issue with it. But the problem is in the context of warfare, in the context of combat, losing your Elcan and not have the ability to go back to iron sights means that somebody or you could get one, in between the eyeballs, because you don't have the ability to react to that. So what consequences is there if the failure is there? And if that's not considered on the onset, on developing the skill set, now you're looking at an inversion of the priorities of life. So all of those things are important, I think.
I would agree with that. I have a thought on it, but I want to hear what Shaun has to say, because he's been sitting in the background just listening.
Yeah, because there's so many things that we could talk about, and we are. And so Seb, his last point that he raised, I'm just going to try to stick to that. The prioritization of life, or the prioritization of focus, is really critical to this conversation, because if you're into a hobby, whatever that hobby is, there probably isn't a high enough priority in the sense of consequential cause of loss of life to others, that you're not taking it as seriously as you would if there was consequential loss of life within your hobby. And so perhaps one of the modern issues that we have is that not enough people understand consequential outcomes of these sort of focuses. And that's no pun intended in respect to the Elcan. So if someone would have put across to me way back in the day that you're about to get an Elcan and that you have to get really good at it by tomorrow in order to save your partner's life, I'm there all day. All day. But that's not often how the topic is put across. That's not often how an Elcan is put across. It's actually left to the individual who's receiving the Elcan, what they think in that moment. Ooh, cool, new toy. How exciting. Or, oh, another tool that I got to get super squared away at so that I can kick that ass. However you spin it in your head, that's on you. But the system as a whole often doesn't teach you how to receive that moment. It doesn't teach you how to think in this moment. That is my point. Chance, you talked about from iron sights to Elcan. And then we're talking about how the blunderbuss and the spears, how they have perhaps not as much bearing in this conversation. I feel that's not true. I feel like the spear is just as relevant as the rifle. Because if you know how to do one well, you know how to do all well. How you do one thing is how you do everything, has always been my opinion on these matters. And so the Elcan is the same as a bowstring to me. It's the same as an arrow. It's the same as sharpening the tip of the arrow. All of these things are the same. It's all part of the little journey. It's all part of the, why am I doing this? I'm not looking for, when I receive that Elcan, I'm not looking for the outcome of, oh, that's going to tighten up my grouping. What I'm looking at the Elcan as is, what is this going to teach me? Where will this take me? Now, let me give you some historical context to ensure that everyone out there doesn't feel that I'm like above this and I have like a really glib answer that has no sort of emotional connection to this moment. Back in 2 Commando, my little unit, my little half platoon, was the first organization in the Canadian Armed Forces to receive the C7 with the Elcan. And it was a trials. We were out in the middle of the Mattawa Plains doing contact drills, pepper potting, advanced contact with the new weapon that we couldn't break. And so there was only a few of them with the Elcan. And I mean, there was the scientists standing there, there was the civilian organization standing there, there was the military organization standing there, plus a bunch of young dudes who just like to get after it. And so as this got handed to me with the don't break it, do you know what I thought? Oh, I'm going to break it. Because if you want to trial this new spear, I'm going to treat it like I am running a spear through something. And so I took it upon myself to like not try to break the Elcan, but to test the Elcan. And so why bother testing? Because you've already established chance that we stand on the shoulder of giants. And so as someone took away my FNC-1A1 and handed me this new thing called the C7 with an Elcan, I reluctantly was receiving one while handing over the other. Because what I was handing over was a freaking battle rifle. It was my assault rifle. It was the FNC-1A1, and I loved it. 7.62 millimeter, freaking hardcore, put rounds downrange like nobody's business. What's this little plastic Mattel toy I'm being handed? That's what it ran through my head. And so, standing on the shoulder of giants in that moment, all I was responsible for was not my opinion. I was responsible to try and set it right for the future. Because I knew that this thing was going to occur in the military. It was my job to make sure that it occurred properly, that it occurred with my stamp of approval on it. And my stamp of approval means like I'm going to beat it up. I'm going to turn it inside out. I'm going to test it. I'm going to see if the LCAM breaks. That's what I felt was my job in the moment. And so these things, these LCANs, moments in life, how you receive the moment will say a lot about you. If I would have received that LCAN and thought, oh, cool new toy, it would have been all about me. But what I did do was receive the LCAN and think, I better get this right for the troops.
So then do you think that and I guess I got to clarify something. When I say the LCAN was coming in as I was going through my training, when I was at basic, I got issued a C7A1 with iron sights. And then by the time I got to my next course, we went to the C7A2 with the LCANs. And so like they were in the system. I just want to clarify that they were in the system when I was going through, but they had not disseminated all the way through the training cycle as of yet at that point in time. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, I think it was around 87 when we did that first field trial. Yeah. And that was literally like no other organization had their greasy little fingers on it other than us. We were the first ones to get it. And for the days that we had it, I literally tried to break it. Mm-hmm. I did not want the C7. I wanted my FN back. But as it turns out, the C7, not so bad. So it didn't break quite as much as we thought. We kind of looked at it as a toy. And I do remember the first time I went down super freaking cronking hard on a pepper pot. And one of the upper receiver halves, ping, flew off. I was like, what? I guess I'll just keep pepper potting. But like that was my first sign of, uh-oh, I'm going to beat it up even more. But, you know, it stood the test of time. It stood the trial, as it were. And what was interesting about that moment, for anyone who's kind of interested in the history of it, is that was my first time ever being observed by scientists. Like they were literally scientists there to see, not us, but see how we interacted with the weapon.
Were they in white lab coats? Because that
no, but close. They were in their chinos.
Oh, okay.
with their little polo collars. And can you imagine? I might pull up a little photo here in a bit if I get a bit of time and show you a photo of me with the scientists standing there in their chino moment. And I'm not going to say I look all hardcore, but I certainly don't look like a scientist. Anyway, for historical perspective, that was my first time ever being observed by scientists, me ever observing scientists. And that's an interesting moment in and of itself, the paradox of skill. If you're in a moment where you're being observed by others closely, chances are you're in the skill moment.
I dig it. I guess I want to go back to what I was thinking here was the fact that you guys are absolutely right. In order to use an optic well, you should know how to, the backup would be the iron sights. You should know how to use that as well. I think those are prerequisites to each other in my mind. But the prerequisite to use a semi-automatic rifle with an optic is not learning how to shoot a bow and arrow. Now, the skills are interchangeable. Being able to shoot is, you can apply one to the other. But when I get to basic, I'm not being taught how to use a bow and arrow so that I can then shoot a rifle better. Right, you just don't have the time frame to be able to pull that off, just because there are constraints, as Seb was saying earlier. But when you do take all those away, absolutely, if you could go back to the beginning of time and say, okay, we're going to learn how to use a rock, and then you're going to learn how to use a spear, and then you're going to learn how to make your own spears, and then and you could walk through the passage of time to gain the skill sets, it would be beneficial for sure.
You could, but I think the focus would be wrong. The institution as a whole, we'll call it the military. I think the focus from the rock to the spear to the rifle focus would be wrong, because it would be focused on the objective outcomes rather than the journey. And so it won't take me long. The moment that you move from rock to stick, you're not moving from tool to tool. You're simply extending your journey of learning. And so the fundamentals of learning anything is the journey. The tool isn't the outcome. The tool is just part of the process. And so from rock to stick to rifle, the Canadian Armed Forces would teach you the object, and the object. How to strip and assemble the C1A1 stick. Wow, that lecture would be amazing. But instead of that, from rock to stick to rifle could be put across as a journey. And the journey is the rich learning process of how to take anything and make it be everything. But that's not what large institutions do. And so that is perhaps for another podcast. I want to take you back to this moment, Chance. So you talked about, the paradox of skill, and how we were talking about how if you start removing your senses, you start dialing in a little bit more to the experience. Sitting right next to me is this little blackout mask, little sleep mask, sits next to my right or left elbow all day, every day. Because when I look down, I think I'm going to go down in the basement and hit the heavy bag blindfolded. And so connecting to a moment typically requires stripping out a sense. So I strip out my vision. Then I put on my headphones and listen to loud music. So now I'm almost like in an interrogation session while zapping a heavy bag, all disoriented. And so that in itself is a skill development, but it's not about the kicking the bag. It's about developing the man, developing the inside. I'll tell you what, if you've never done spinning back kicks blindfolded with loud music, it's disorienting and a little bit nauseous. Like I've done it long enough that you almost want to vomit towards the end of a session because it puts you out of odds. I'm not going to say it's like an interrogation, but it's a weird environment if you've never done it before, and I encourage anyone to give it a try. And so that stripping away of all the senses helps you understand the one sense inside of you that we just rarely ever connect with. And that is that soulful sense, the what is inside of me right now. All the external white noise sometimes dulls down that internal message.
Seb, you got anything on that? No?
No, not really, actually. That was
All right.
well said.
Okay, well then I have a question on that, because I think that there are gaps between skill sets. So like, in order to be, as we said earlier, if the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, right? In order to be good at any one thing, the process is pretty much the same regardless of what that thing is you're learning. But is there a skill set to learning new skill sets? Is there things that we need to be able to be good at in order to get good at other things? What do you think, Seb?
Well, I mean, that's been thoroughly documented by people much smarter than me. There's various learning fundamentals that if they're optimized, you are optimizing your ability to learn. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, from my limited reading in the field, it has a lot to do with perception. It has a lot to do with how you learn best. It has a lot to do with you sort of fine-tuning the process by which you learn best and becoming a part of the process and optimizing that very process. And so I think that ultimately, if we look at all of those things, what it comes down to is introspective ability and lack of fear of exposure, or at the very least, understanding that there is such a benefit to exposure that it supersedes our fear of exposure. you know. And so I think that in order for you to be able to establish exactly how the way forward is going to look and how to optimize yourself in that context, you need to know where your limitations are. You need to know where your fears are, where pride seeps in, where your ego stands on the matter, where, you know, and all of those things. And so one of the tools that I used to get jiu-jitsu people to overcome this in the context of jiu-jitsu is just explaining the ridiculousness associated with winning the 6 o'clock class. You know, like, okay, dude, like, so let me get this straight. You go home, that when you go home at night and you're driving in your car and you're now, say, a purple belt and you're, you know, 200 pounds and you're a Div 1 wrestler and you've smashed everybody along the way, your guard and none the better, you know, because you never had to use it actually. And so you did win the 6 o'clock class, I'll give you that. And Todd, the librarian, who's a brown belt and 57 years old, got smashed. But the reality is you prevented yourself from learning something that you fundamentally need to learn that will get not only your current skill set better, but all of your alternative skill sets better. And so everything that's correlated to the current skill set that could be taken away by somebody else that shows up with a better skill set at whatever it is that you are doing. And so if I used to tell them that, and when you tell humans some things, there's two things that are going to happen. They're either contrarian. So if you tell them that they're going to get offended at something you're saying, they're not going to get offended. So if you want to prevent them from being offended, you just tell them they would be offended. They won't. Or you explain and deconstruct what the propensity is and that we're all doing this, but just realize that that's not how you're going to get better. You are going to have to do the things that you suck at. You'll have to expose them, and you will have to go home thinking you suck at jiu-jitsu for months because you started in your guard as a purple belt and your guard was at a blue belt level. And now you're finding yourself playing catch up. And so that's the reason why, you know, Smithy, the 3-stripe blue belt, smashed you while you were trying to work on your guard. But the reality doesn't change. The outcome is one piece, and that's why it's difficult on your ego. I get it, but it doesn't change the fact that staying away from that, the performance of that method is going to stand between you and being better. So the reason why, say, top jiu-jitsu players or top athletes in whatever other fields is often there's less fear of getting caught in doing some things because they have fundamentally skills that can get them out of almost any jam. And so if at the fundamental level they have that, then they can take all kinds of risk. And so now not only are you getting better actually, but now you're also getting better because you're taking risk. But in order to take risk, you also have to be willing to expose yourself. And so when you take guys like, say, the Gordon Ryans of this world or other guys at the highest levels, one of the things that the training partners have said over and over again is, I caught him. They got caught. Like, I have never seen a guy get caught in competition, but somehow they get caught in the training room, right? Why is that? Well, that's because they accept to get exposed on account of the greater good, which is the competition field or the arena or the boardroom or whatever your version of a battlefield is going to be.
So then, do you think that this is a like a lack of creativity in the use of one's skill? Let's put it this way. I wrote down stuck in comfort, in that when you know the outcome, right? I'm going to go to class at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to smash that librarian and be like, yeah. Well, I knew that outcome was going to happen already. That was presupposed. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to destroy this dude. And I'm going to get that little win, and I'm going to get that uptick. But that doesn't allow then for me to be creative in what it is I'm doing, whatever that skill is, whether that is jiu-jitsu or it is a friggin' art class. And you look at the person next to you and be like, I'm going to friggin' paint a better mountain than that. Screw you, right? That it eliminates your ability to creatively play with that situation, to play with that skill. Does that track? Does that sound about right?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of a lot of things, and I mean, there could be a variety of different factors that influence a person's inability to fully expose, or to seek exposure, or to even embrace it, or maybe even like it for some people, you know. But I do believe that when we look at human beings in general, we often, and that includes the person speaking, like I'm not pretending that I'm not that guy, and I have been over the years and caught myself doing that, favoring instant gratification over long-term gains. And that is an easy trap to fall into, because it's nice to leave a jiu-jitsu class and feel good about yourself. It actually is. It really sucked, and they make memes about that. When newly promoted blue belts are crying in the car driving home, and I think that, as much fun as we make of those situations, those are the situations that are really the crucibles that are helping people develop some amazing skills or develop amazing resilience in the context of whatever skills they're applying. And I think that not seeing that and not detaching ourselves from the current moment is a massive disservice to how good you could actually be.
Shaun, what do you got?
So the paradox of skill would be, one of the paradoxes would be, as Seb just said, you have to be exposed to Gordon Ryan in order to understand that you're not Gordon Ryan. I know that's not exactly what Seb said, but I'm loosely playing with it. And therefore, if you're the brown belt, 57-year-old brown belt who's showing up and you just got smashed by maybe a younger purple belt, as a brown belt, as a 57-year-old, I would hope that that individual would have the context to look at it from a higher perspective and think, big deal, whatever, man. And so that's where you should be at as a brown belt, I feel, in life. And even if you don't have a brown belt, let's say you've got a white belt in life, the moment that someone smashes on you in a skill, you should have the maturity to be able to look at it and think, okay, now I've got context. That purple belt just smashed on me as a white belt. Obviously, I've got to improve in BJJ. But contextually, that individual in front of me is, and you can start making arguments like, but he's a goof when he drives his car out of the parking lot. And that's what humans do. Like, we'll start filling in the gaps as to our own shortcomings. I can't kick his ass in BJJ, but I can kick his ass making coffee. That's kind of what we do as humans. And so that is something that you've got to be careful of with the paradox of skill. When you know that you are up against it, you're in front of someone who's got way more skill, the penchant or the normal attitude is to, yeah, but I'm better at ... We shore up our shortcomings by redirecting our attention to something that is irrelevant to the skilled required moment. No one in special operations shows up at a moment and thinks, I don't belong here, but I'm pretty good at making coffee. No one ever thinks that, of course. But here's a distinction. There's no problem with being in special operations and knowing that you belong there, and also being able to say, and I also make a pretty good coffee as well. Skills are all contextual. The better you are at one thing, it will teach you how you're not as good at another thing. And so that is just independently within yourself. Skills have paradoxes. And person to person, the paradox is, if I show up mega skilled and Seb shows up not as skilled, he may start filling in the gaps as to where he feels he needs to shore up his skills, but not within the lane that we're talking about. Within other lanes like choreography. And so there's paradoxes constantly on this subject. I mean, two ends of the polar opposite paradoxes. We just got to play with the fundamentals more so than the specifics, I think.
So then it seems like we have to have a balance, obviously, right? We have to find our own balance as well, but I have all these different thoughts running through my head.
So you're right. Okay, so we got to find a balance.
Yeah.
So how do you find a balance, Chance? Do you like hang out in your basement and like start writing in your journal about how you're the best BJJ player in the world, and you never go on the internet, you never get any context, you never look up Gordon Ryan? Is that how you get context? No, that's not how Chance Burles does it, but that's how others might do it. And so context and balance are hand in hand. A person might feel like they're choosing a balanced perspective, but only based on 30 seconds of understanding or research or looking around to see what the battle space is or the rule set is or the win conditions are or the chaos theory of it is. They just simply choose a thing and determine, I'm pretty good at that or I suck at that without any context. Now, Chance, you've got context because you've been in the game, you know who Gordon Ryan is, etc., etc. But on day one, you did not. And like most, myself included, on day one, I thought, I think I'll be pretty good at this. I mean, I'm loosely stating that. That's not exactly what I said. But in my mind, I thought, I've got like 30 odd years of martial arts. I can throw guys through walls. I'm this, that, and the other thing. Like the little narrative that we tell ourselves, the dumb stuff that we say to ourselves. That is our context before we step into the new skill. And I stepped onto day one of that mats and I saw Tweety Birds for about 15 minutes as the boys basically had their way with me. And so that's context. So, just think it's worth digging into that a bit.
Agreed. What do you got, Seb?
Yeah, I love that that vein. I think there's lots there. So when it comes to establish, there's obviously a quote that says, "You don't know what you don't know," and that's real. Like you actually don't, but you can always look to find out what you don't know, and what you find out is going to be assessed rightfully or not based upon your willingness to acknowledge that you don't know as much as you think you do, and or that potentially you don't even know enough to understand what you're looking at or not knowing, and so now that we're starting to deconstruct a whole bunch of things. And the reason why I'm doing this is this: critical analysis requires us to prove ourselves wrong. And so the issue is, if I'm conducting critical analysis, but I'm so cognitively biased on what it is that I'm doing, I can lead myself into confirmation of what it is that I'm advancing. This is no different than in investigative techniques or interrogations or whatever the case may be. Like police officers, well-intended police officers, experienced police officers will sometimes cater to their preconceived notion in relation to the investigation. And that is highly documented and essentially manifest the whatever it is that they came up with as a hypothesis to begin with, as opposed to objectively looking at the facts and looking at everything and trying to establish some level of accuracy. Because 100% accuracy just isn't happening, but we're looking for balance here. We're not looking for perfection. And so for me, one of the really challenging things is, and when I'm conducting a critical analysis on anything, including the stupid little left and right argument that we find online or whatever the case may be, I try to either disprove my theory or prove myself wrong. So if I start thinking, I think I'm getting pretty good at jiu-jitsu, it's pretty easy to prove myself wrong in a variety of different ways. And that's at the theoretical level. I'm not even talking about stepping on the mats because we're not even there yet. Right now, we're engaging in a cognitive process of me chomping my own ego down before somebody else does, right? Because that's important. And so if I'm thinking that my guard is getting pretty good, so let's take the guard, for example, and I'm now advanced, or you can extrapolate this to any other sports that you're in. Now I start looking around to find people that make this look like I have never done it in my life ever, right? So now I establish sort of a left and a right of arc. Okay, this is where I'm at, somewhere here. This is what somebody that's a white belt that's horrible is at, and this is where a person at the world-class level is operating at. So now I'm giving myself a realistic range of evaluation. Now, but unfortunately, because I have an innate bias or a developed bias, because it in wanting to protect my ego, I will also soften the blow of how much better that person actually would be. Because now you may be looking at a person that's going against a person that's already much better than you. And now you're seeing that person doing better than you. However, the discrepancy is not that high because they themselves are fighting somebody that's much better than you. So there's kind of a two-prong approach here, and Shaun alluded to it. I'm going there in a second. You got your critical analysis where you look to disprove what it is that you believe, and that gives you, and you may not, and perfect. If you don't, you have your left and right of arc, and you understand how to frame your argument and all of those things. But then also, once you've established something that you feel is some measure of accurate, now you have to put the wheels to the pavement, because otherwise theory is theory. And that, you need to understand. So here's a nuance, or here's something that only people that competed. And to be clear, I've competed at very low levels, right? I didn't compete at the super high levels in jiu-jitsu or anything like that. But I will tell you this, even in CrossFit competition, for example. So at the CrossFit Regional Games, a 500-pound squat in the gym is a 375-pound squat on the floor. 20 muscle ups in the gym is 12 on the floor. It's the same with jiu-jitsu. Your ability to retain your guard, your ability to pass, your cardio, your jiu-jitsu related cardio, all of those things, because there's a bunch of additional factors that are kicking in that are making the accomplishment of said thing in a different context way harder than you will expect it to be. So now you're looking at somebody performing the very skills that you're comparing or referencing in relation to your own skills, but they're doing it in a context of competition. So now you think that you've seen, okay, yeah, he's obviously better, but how much better? Because now it's very hard to quantify what happens on the competition field and how much more difficult it is to do all of those things. Everybody's an MMA expert when they watch UFC, and they know exactly where they would go, right? But when you're in an MMA class and you're in side control and you're getting elbowed, you're like, man, I have no idea where I'm at, let alone what I'm supposed to do, right? And so, anyways, critical analysis, seeking the things that are disproving what it is that your self-belief, especially if it's self-inflating, and then finding a way to put that into application to see what it actually feels like.
I love this, and I have a direct example. We just came back from a tournament last week, a couple weeks ago, me and my students, and they told me exactly the same thing. They're like, I had this great plan, and I bowed onto the mats, and it was gone. And all of a sudden, I forgot I had feet when we started rolling. And I videotaped the whole thing, and we did little AARs, and we ran down, oh, well, this is where this happened, this is what this happened, et cetera, allow them to see from the outside perspective where they went with it. But when you guys were talking, I had this great image. Do you guys remember the story of Little John and Robin Hood? Do you know, like, where they met and became friends and so on and so forth? And the fact that Little John was drowning in like 2 feet of water, right? And the whole story is that somebody from the outside, Robin Hood, has to say, push your feet down, like stand up, you're going to be okay. But in his own mind, he was drowning. There's like, I'm going to die. Oh my God. Without any sort of internal processing available to then say, have I even tried to put my feet down? Have I done any of the steps prior to this that will help me out of this situation? It's just sheer panic in the situation because you have no cognitive skills to pull on at that point in time, because you have no context of ever being in that situation before. Because if you don't know how to swim, you don't think to put your feet down. You just start flailing. And but that's where context comes in. I'm really digging this. Shaun, what do you got?
Okay. Little John and Robin Hood. Why did Little John listen to Robin Hood?
He had no other option.
He had a feather in his hat? He was wearing a bow and arrow? What was it? Why did he listen to Robin Hood?
Because he had no other option. He was
He had
either
option.
die
He could have
or
drowned.
listen.
He was drowning already. Hey?
Not really. That's true. Yeah.
Hey? So why did he listen? Why does anyone listen? Did he want to listen? Yeah, he did. He was listening. He was actively listening for help. So, he listened, and then the tale unfolds, and it's a good tale. But I think that's the case for everyone out there who's looking for help, who's looking for a hand, who's looking for skills the paradox of skills. There he is, probably a capable man of swimming, but doesn't see what's going on and therefore can't stand up. The skill was standing, or was the skill listening? What do you think, Chance?
The appropriate skill in that moment would probably be listening.
Correct. And so he listened, heard the words, stand up, and then he applied what?
Critical thought, I would
Action.
imagine. Action, there you go.
Which is the point that Seb has made, for sure. And so we take that whole tale, the saga of Robin Hood and how he was taken from the rich, given to the poor, a story that I heard countless times as a young boy in England, and in fact, helped establish some of my morals and my values, believe it or not, as a kid in England, as I was standing in the forest that I thought, or I believe, is historically the forest that Robin Hood and the gang actually hung out in. And that's the way of the world, man. That is the way of the world for me anyway. If I want to understand what a skilled samurai would feel, well, I'll go to the frickin' Nakasendo Valley and I'll go hang out in the bushline and see what a samurai felt. And if I want to see what Robin Hood was all about, I'll go stand in that forest to try to imagine. So look at all this freaking dust. I feel like I'm in a
magical.
galactic
It really is.
storm. It's magic.
It's amazing.
It is. It's not a filter, troops. It's the universe. And so Little John stood up because he listened. He was desperate to listen, I feel, in this moment. And he was just, the voice appeared and he followed its call. And then we've got the myth. Then we've got Shaun listening to a myth. And now we've got Shaun leading a little bit of his life based on that myth. And I feel that is the same way with what Seb was just saying. You know, Seb, Chance, and myself will say something today that will hang on in someone's mind, that will hang on in someone's soul. A few words, a simple paragraph that will change someone's life to some degree. And so that is a skill unto itself. The idea that the story that you just told about Robin Hood, how you relate it had no bearing on me. It told me a different story about this moment. And so that is the way of it, I think. If you're trying to pay attention to the world, it's telling us all different stories. And it's for you to interpret the story, as it were.
Seb, you got something?
I do. You know, this is true, and it's an interesting time in humanity to have this conversation, because I think to a certain extent we've made it that if the story that I tell myself is different from the story that the other person tell themselves, then automatically we're completely at odds and we have nothing in common, and we should be enemies, or we should cancel each other, or we should try to repress each other, or whatever the case may be. Advancement through dialectics, which is precisely what we've done over the course of, I don't know how many hundreds of podcasts, and probably thousands by now. Dialectics is exactly that. It's sharpening the edge, having conversations that bring not only to the equation all of the things that you think about something, but by the time that this something is done being bounced off people that think differently than you, you're going to think completely differently. You can think completely differently in the same direction that you were, or perhaps you may have a revelation and have a complete change of heart. And that is A-okay, because you've now spent some time pressure testing your thoughts instead of protecting them on account of protecting your fragile ego. And so I think that is a highly underrated skills, to go back to what you were asking earlier, Chance, about the ability to learn those types of things. It's when it's challenging. This is kind of like faith. You know, it's easy to have faith in anything if things are all going well. It's when it's pressure tested that you evaluate how faithful you are in whatever that is, not necessarily in a religious sense, certainly can be. But I think that as a fundamental rule of thumb, in order to optimize and in order to learn as much as I have to be willing to learn, I have to be willing to be wrong, which is, again, an ego management issue. Does being wrong make me automatically a lesser human at all these other things? And this is what the problem is. If you have only one context to evaluate by, and you put a lot of weight in, say, for example, something fleeting like external validation. Well, if you only had 30 minutes on the podcast, you definitely don't want to look like the dumb guy in the group, right? Because now other people will judge you and your entire lifetime on account of a 30-minute podcast that you were engaged in, which was completely contextual, and you had no idea what you were doing in that very context. And Einstein never actually said that, but there is a quote that's attributed to him that says, if you judge the intelligence of a fish by having him climb a tree, you're going to find out that it's not that smart, right? Something to that effect. But the reality is Einstein never actually said that. And we don't know who did, but he was brilliant, because that's brilliant. So anyways, I through dialectics, I developed my original response, which is, yes, all those other things, understanding the type of learner you are, having the willingness and the propensity to expose and to be less than on account of the greater good, which is learning, also has to be put into context with negotiating life in a manageable way. I couldn't possibly go on, say, 10 podcasts in a row that are 30 minutes long and expose all of my weaknesses for everybody to see for 10 podcasts for 30 minutes, because then you have no podcast to go to. So in order for you to keep for you to keep a certain measure of value, you obviously will need to showcase some of the things that you do while maintaining a certain degree of willingness to expose.
So this is interesting. It just brought up a memory. Last night, my youngest asked me what my favorite sport was. He asked the whole table. He was like, "What are you guys' favorite sport?" And the topic of baseball came up. That was my oldest, his favorite sport. And I was like, "Are we talking about to play or to watch? Because those are two different things, right?" And like, watching baseball is pretty boring, but I don't mind playing. But we got into the conversation of that baseball is almost a study in mathematics. It's a study of the aggregate. You're looking at large scale things over time, and because the rules are so entrenched and they're not adding anything new, you're able to predict and create mathematical constructs around the skills that it takes to play the game. And what it made me think of was the fact that that is how we have to look at, especially oration, is that it's in an aggregate format. Because I could technically go up on like a TED Talk and I could give the greatest speech in the world and it would be amazing, and the 200 people that were in attendance would be changed and altered forever. And then it might get 7 views on YouTube, right? Or we can have a weekly, daily podcast that continually comes up with new information in tidbits, little bite-sized pieces that people can add in throughout their lifetime or throughout the period of whatever that show is, and then develop their own skill sets. To Shaun's point of listening to Robin Hood and Little John and that whole story, that story has changed millions of times since it first started being used. Those little shifts, the aggregate, isn't so important as the lessons that it teaches in the aggregate, right? Like the score of whatever it is that is being told or measured isn't so important as the change that it then entails, in my mind. Does that make sense, Shaun? What do you think?
It does make sense, and it would be important to you given that I know you, but it might not be important to someone else. So what you feel is important and what someone else does are two different things, of course. And so let me ask you a question, and keep it short because then I've got a follow-on statement. So you propose 2 scenarios. One is, the TED Talk of the moment, and the other one is multiple dribbles of wisdom every day for the rest of your life. Which one are you choosing that you're going to do?
I'm going to do, as bad as this sounds, I'm going to do little dribbles for the rest of my life.
Why is that?
because I think that outside of that moment, the information that's being delivered in a single moment is not as fleshed out as something that you could rehash every day, investigate, reinvigorate.
And so that's through the
information.
lens of your eyes or through the lens of someone who's viewing you?
That would be through the lens of my eyes, is that I would
Which is
be able
unimportant
to... Okay.
as a delivery for the outcome, right? Because you said you're focused on the outcome.
Yes. Yep.
And are you focused on your outcome or the viewer's outcome?
In this moment, I am focused on everyone's outcome as a group.
It's not what it felt like. It felt like you were focused on your outcome, what would be best for you to learn in the moment and in a skill-based setting. And that's okay, because I didn't categorize it as what is best for the world in this choice. I left it open-ended for you to decide. And so it's not that it's telling. It's not that it says a lot about you. It's just got us to this moment where a person has to decide which one is the one that they want to do. Dribble it out or go hardcore TED Talk. And most people will start determining that based on, well, what is good for me? And there's nothing wrong with that, unless the outcome focus is what is good for everyone else. And so therein lies the rub. Skills. Why are we getting good at them? Is it our own little hedonistic journey? Or, ... is it purposeful and serviceful on behalf of others? And I'm not saying if you choose one, you're a jerk, and if you choose the other one, you're awesome. And then flip that. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that that is the choice, believe it or not. And also, I also have to establish that they're not mutually exclusive. And so, sorry about that, Seb. I saw you writing it down. I just thought I'd better throw it in there. And so, there's many ways to look at this moment, of course. And Chance, I'm not like using you as the poor case study. I'm using you as the great case study. Because I know that this isn't a academic consideration for you, whereby you are, you've got no skin in the game. You've literally got hundreds of skins in the game. You are one of the most qualified persons in your life to make the decision as to this topic because you have got skin in the game. It's not an intellectual decision for you. But what it is a more refined decision. And so the refining of the decision is how deep do you think about the moment? How deeply are you thinking about what we're talking about? At first blush or at surface level, it's a binary decision. Oh, it's about me. Oh, it's about them. But then really when you start going, you hit the elevator button down to the 27th floor, there's a lot to think about.
At that point, it's about everybody. It's about the entire human race and civilization. I love it. Seb, what do you got?
I want to save the world. This, like, literally your mind reader. Yeah, I really like that, and that was an incredibly powerful nuance that Shaun brought over here, and that allows us down something that definitely I would have 100% forgotten if we didn't do it just now. So I appreciate that. But when it comes to assigning an outcome, and when we are looking at the pursuit of excellence in any field, we understand there will be a temporary state of obsession, ideally temporary. A lot of people seek the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and it never becomes temporary. It's okay, but balance needs to be there. Now, eventually it can get pretty costly. What we need to consider is anything that is completely self-serving isn't necessarily going to be developing the way we want it to, simply because what we are trying to keep in check is prideful and egotistic tendencies that we all have. And it's very difficult to do that if you are the center focus of everything. It's very difficult. Imagine being the center of the universe and all of a sudden, every time that something is questioned or that you're being challenged or that you're challenging yourself, or all of those things that threaten that sort of self-centeredness, or that centeredness, that sort of metaphorical location that you find yourself into. I also think that there is a whole bunch of underlying sort of less tangible, perhaps even to a certain extent spiritual things involved in here, when it comes to really from a posture of the heart taking care of trying to do something for others. And I think that cannot be discounted. I think that if you ask people that have sacrificed a lot on account of the collective, you have sort of two camps. You have the ones that are in sort of victimhood because they never got the quote unquote, because it was never about the collective. It was ultimately always about them. And so if they didn't get the recognition they needed for doing what they did in relation to collective, now we find ourselves in victimhood. But if the reason why you are doing something is truly altruistic, understanding that you have a benefit. I'm not trying to be disingenuous here. If it makes me feel good, automatically there is a benefit. I can't pretend there isn't, right? But it shouldn't be the underlying or the underpinnings of what it is that you are doing and why you're developing the skills at the level at which you are doing them. It should be a byproduct of it. But if the goal is truly altruistic, you are going to become better at things that you could if you didn't, simply by keeping your ego in check. And we're not even looking at all the other components, such as spiritual factors that you may or may not believe in, right? But that's a reality. If you along the way, as you are becoming this Olympic level javelin thrower, start thinking there has to be more to this, and I have a voice now, and I have a following, and I have people looking up to me, and I have an opportunity to, and I'm not talking about engaging in frivolous political discourses or anything that, just to infuriate and divide and not really do anything. But if you have the ability to provide, or if you have the ability to be an inspiration, for example, if you have an ability to lead in a way or another and do so in a positive way, for you to not reassess why you're doing what you're doing is going to be a disservice. And I don't have a baseline to compare it to. So it's not like we've taken 100 athletes and said, okay, you're going to do it for yourself for this amount of time, and then we're going to switch and add some purpose. But what you're also doing in that application of skill is you are finding a greater purpose that you are attaching those skills to, which is going to lead into you wanting to continue to develop those skills, or at the very least have the ability to transition them into something else. And so I think that it's an oversimplification to think, well, this is what I'm doing now, and I'm just 100% focused on that. It's like, I understand what you're doing, and you don't have to sort of, you don't have to reduce the focus necessarily on account of having an underlying or a wider, a broader mission statement. But you're going to, if there is any challenging things, and we are talking fundamentally so challenging that they could be catastrophic, having multiple reasons why you are doing something other than I just like to be good at stuff is going to really help translate this into actionable items that you can overcome adversity with. And when the time comes and you decide that you're going to take your skills and bring them somewhere else, you're going to be less prone to falling into that victimhood loop, which is, I develop all these skills, and now, this is the man I used to be, and now I'm not the same guy, and all of those things, because you've already started implementing an other purpose or meaning through what it is that you were doing and why. And so now you have an opportunity to pivot and give a little bit more and continue giving. This is always the constant. It's not like you flip the script and bring it back to you. And if you do bring it back to you, you bring it back to you for the sake of the collective, if at all possible. Now, somebody might sit there and say, why should I do that? And I don't know that I can answer that categorically, but I will say this: try it and see what happens. Try to make yourself the focus of everything, and everything that you are doing being done so in a self-service, in a self-serving manner, and see where it leads you. See where it inflates your ego. See where you're becoming your own worst enemy when you start being in your own way, where your relationships are affected, when the outcomes are affected, all of those things. I think that for anybody who spent a lot of time doing things for the collective in one field of endeavor or another, really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the ultimate sacrifice. It could be anything. I think we all know how much value there is in that, but I think we understate it, especially if we're not feeling so great. And I remember at Travis Bader and I having this conversation maybe a year ago, where sometimes when you are truly, truly struggling, sometimes doing something for somebody else is the ace in your pocket, you know?
Yeah, I would agree to that. The other thing I don't agree is the fact that I'm not the center of the universe, because I am. Thank you very much. So, but honestly, though, the funny thing is, the thing that clicked in my head there, you asked you kind of stated a question there of somebody asking you why they should do something versus not, right? That question is a trap. And I've had to deal with this in the advocacy world on a regular basis, because a lot of times people come at you with like, oh, well, give me one reason why I should stay here. Give me a reason why I should do these things. Why should I do those hard things? And it's a trap. It's not up to me to tell you why somebody should do something. It's up to you to tell yourself why you should or shouldn't do those things. And I just want to put that out there, because and I've thrown the question out myself to other people have thrown it at me. It took me a while to realize that that question has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them. What do you got, Shaun? You look like you're waiting patiently.
Well, I mean, I don't fully agree with what you just said. It's a trap. Well, what is a trap? Oh, let's call it an ambush. Well, what is an ambush? An ambush is a two-way street, baby. It's not like you're walking in there blindly and then standing there blindly. It's a two-way street. You get to respond. So the trap is what? The other person not thinking, the other person not being aware, the other person not having the context, not having the skills to be able to understand the moment. That's fine. That isn't a trap. That's just not fully aware, I would say. And so then if they're not fully aware and you are more aware, then is the trap that you're not educating them in the moment? You don't find the right words, or are you assuming or presuming that they aren't going to listen to you because they are aware of the trap? Or I'm not sure I can stand behind what you said as it's a trap is my point, which I don't want to focus on right now. My focus is this. It's something that Seb said just a little bit ago, and I wrote it down. So specifically, he said, you got to be willing to be wrong. When it comes to skill sets, when it comes to moments, when it comes to interactions, and perhaps more relevantly, chance to what I was just saying, when you are interacting with someone in that trap moment, you've got to be willing to be wrong. But there's 3 states of willing, is what I wrote down. And I know Seb knows this, we all know this. You've got to be willing to be wrong. You've also got to be willing to be right. And the third thing is you've just got to willing to be. You've got to will to be, rather than the default of, oh, I'm going to try being wrong, or I'm going to try being right. You've just got to be in that moment. And so, Chance, to your case study of how to do that moment well, I think that where it goes wrong is one of the parties is just not willing to be in the moment with an open mind, with an open heart, with an open vision of the person in front of them, as to, they're not here to screw me over. They're not here to be wrong. They're here to share this moment with me. And now it's on me to willing to be.
Yeah, it's accurate. One of the things that clicked in my head is, you guys know the term sonder? You guys ever heard of that before? It's the...
Did you say saunter or sonder?
Sonder, S-O-N-D-E-R, sonder.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to throw out a quick definition for those that are listening that don't know what it means. It is the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherited craziness. And it makes me think of that. What you were saying makes me think of that, because we are in those moments where I said it's a trap. In my experience, it has been a trap. It has been a way in which to throw it back in your face, right? So I want to clarify that. But you're right, because I'm trying to be in that moment. I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to assist somebody get through a difficult time period in their life, et cetera, et cetera. But in order to do that, I have to have a understanding of Sonder. I have to have an understanding that their life is just as full and extreme and interactive as mine is. And to be in that moment with another person takes that understanding, takes that realization, at least in my mind. Seb, what do you got? I saw you taking notes furiously.
I wasn't exactly furious. I was actually drawing a little stick man. No.
Oh, nice.
There's quite a few things that we can go on this. I think then all of those things are very important. I believe it comes down to the skill of articulation, but more importantly, what you believe in is going to be directly proportionate to your ability to articulate it. We can tell each other stories all day, and I'm not talking articulated in a public setting. Some people get obviously incapable of articulating in public settings because the stress is increased to a level that it becomes unmanageable. I'm not talking about public speaking here. That's not what I'm talking about. But having the ability to articulate to yourself at the very least, and to ideally to a detractor or to somebody that's asking a question, cement a certain level of understanding of what you are believing in. I don't care. You can be the best sniper in the world. You've had all this experience, but if you cannot deconstruct ballistic and your weapon, it's going to be very hard to be the complete SME, or to have somebody even want to give you the time of day on account of the things that you don't even know that you're talking about, right? And so having the ability to articulate yourself and what you are demanding and what you're doing and what you're doing and why. But it's the same for all of the beliefs that you might have. I think it's critically important in faith. I think it's critically important in and so the spiritual realm, the all of the realm, the physical realm, all of the things. Why is it that you selected jiu-jitsu or boxing or whatever on account of, and it doesn't need to be that there's no argument for the other thing and that automatically you need to change because you have to have the best argument. Otherwise, no, that's not what it says at all. But how are you articulating to yourself that what you are making as a decision is the best possible decision based on the totality of your circumstances, not everybody else, in relation to what it is that you are developing as a skill set right now and why? And so when you call it you called it a trap, and to an extent, for a person that's not prepared to articulate themselves in that context, is a trap. Now, I'm going to add a little layer to this. First and foremost, you are trying to help. And there is nothing that will get your wheel grinding faster than somebody not doing anything, questioning something that somebody that's trying to help is trying to do, right? It's very frustrating because you're out there trying to help, you're trying to make a difference, and ultimately you're trying to make a difference for him as well. And now you're under the gun, and yes, you should be able to articulate that very question, because otherwise, do you know 100% why you are doing what you are doing, or are you half guessing and half knowing? Because it's going to take a lot more resolve than that when things get really, really dicey. And so anything that isn't pressure tested allows us all kinds of freedom with our thought process. And it really doesn't matter if the depth is very shallow, but it does matter when things get really pressure tested. This is the difference between being successful, say on selection, and overcoming those little voices that are the negative voices that are trying to get you out to tell you that you haven't seen your wife in so long, that your kids are probably missing you, that your knee is hurting a lot more than it is, that you're probably not doing so well anyways, and all the things. Or having a mindset that's so anchored in multiple things that no matter what you lose, there's something else to hang on to, kind of thing. And so I just wanted to bring this up. If you have a set of belief that is very important to you, that has a lot of meaning, understand what you are believing in and why. It doesn't need to be that response is satisfactory for somebody else. It just needs to be that response is satisfactory for you once pressure tested.
I like it. Shaun, what do you got?
So that is critical. That is critical. And then how do you, if you fully understand what's inside of your knowledge base and all of that good stuff, we'll call it the skill package. If you understand all of that, then how do you pass that along to someone else, the communicating of it, as it were? That is the trick, of course. And so some things, some skills I explain better than others. And if I feel that I don't explain that skill as well as I want, then I just put up an action. And so if there's very little of my videos that I put up online on Instagram that I explain exactly what I'm doing, that I will break it down as if I'm an instructor. I put up my content and it's for the beholder, the person who's watching it, to instruct themselves at whatever is the appropriate skill level that they need at that moment. But I'm not here to be the internet instructor. It's just not my role. It's not my jam. It's not what I want. I just don't want that position. There's other people who are probably doing it better than I am. And so I do what I do in the way that I do it. Now, interestingly enough, we had a podcast chance. We put it in the can, so it's recorded just a week or two ago. And in it, I stated that, and the reason I'm going to say this is because Seb brought up sniping, being a sniper. In that podcast, I'd stated that, look, I'm the wrong guy to ask any questions of a tour in Afghanistan because I've never been there. I don't know. I never deployed on any of those missions. I'm like the worst armchair quarterback. I just don't have answers for you. I have opinions based on a variety of careers and a variety of life experiences, but I can't tell you what my sweat smells like in the desert of Afghanistan because I've never experienced it. Now, with that said, if someone was looking to me for skills about how to be a sniper in Afghanistan, then I'd say, move along. I'm not your guy. But if you're wanting to learn things that aren't specific to sniping, we'll call it life, but we're going to talk about life through the proxy of sniping, now I'm interested. And so it's not about BJJ. It's not about sniping. It's not about making coffee. It's not about taking photos. It is about a commonality or a connection with the human being or beings in front of me that we can establish. I'm interested in them. They're interested in something about me. Now it's my job to try to relay that, to communicate appropriately. So again, it is a tricky balance to put your skill sets across to the internet or across to a person who's standing right directly in front of you in your own room in a way that can be done in seconds. I can't explain my life in seconds to someone who doesn't know me. But if they approach me to learn about sniping, then I'm just going to use that opportunity to get to know them better until I finally understand why we're talking. Because they're not connecting with me to talk about sniping. Because I'm not like the world's best sniper. They're connecting to talk with me for many other reasons that perhaps neither of us know at that time. But they're reaching out not to learn about an LCAN scope. They're reaching out to me for other reasons. And I feel that fundamentally is the case for nearly everything. If you want to, if you don't know how to play volleyball, but all of a sudden you get interested in volleyball, it's never about the volleyball. It's never about the net or the court or the lighting in the gym. It's always tertiary reasons that typically we're not aware of. It's because my friends are, because I want to get to know that person, or I've ... fill in the blank. We often take on skills for reasons unknown to us at the time. And then many years later, we understand it a bit better. But as we better understand it, it allows us to talk with people who were in our own shoes 10 years prior, who didn't know why they were interested in volleyball, who didn't even understand what an LCAN was, but somehow they felt drawn to optics or long distance shooting or whatever. but that conversation will take them to a point with me or with anyone else who's been in the game a while. It'll take them to the fundamental point where we're actually not talking about sniping. We're not even talking about skills anymore. We're talking about what it is to be a human being and life stuff. Is that not what you guys find? When someone enters into a conversation with you, Chance, about BJJ, does it stay just purely in the lane of BJJ where it's all about the armbar? That's not the way for me. The conversation might start that way, but in very rapid order. I'm looking to shift the conversation in a direction that is not about the armbar.
Agreed. What do you got, Seb?
It brings us into the field of authenticity, right? And how difficult that is, because all of the things that we spoke about earlier, all of the mechanisms that are preventing you from, and all the ego flare-ups and all those things ultimately affect authenticity. And so if you have issues in all of those things, then you're coming at an angle for a very different reason. But I think what it does is gives us an opportunity not to see it as a victim, everybody showing up brings all their things. But I think there's an opportunity there for us to try to establish what the underlying reason is. And I think that's a really cool thing to try to do in connecting with other human beings, because you don't need to have a real extensive conversation necessarily. You just need to understand that there seems to be something underlying. And this is not an assumption, and it's not that it's nefarious in nature or anything like that, even that it's willful. But if it is something that we keep in mind, maybe we have the right conversation, because the other conversation isn't going to be satisfactory, because that's not what the conversation was about to begin with, right? So an example that I've used on this show, I believe before in one of my coaching sessions, the guy was giving me all these reasons why jiu-jitsu wasn't right for him. And I'm sitting here as a black belt, and he's a guy that's never spent a day on the mat. And I'm obviously rebutting every single one of the things in my head, and I'm not doing it. I'm just listening. I'm actively listening. At the end of the day, I was able to establish that the real concern here was coming by way of his spouse, that knew that if he was picking up something else, which he already had a bunch of hobbies, that the time they would spend together would be diminished, right? And so instead of having the conversation and convincing him how BJJ was the right sport for him, my ability to articulate it flawlessly to a newbie, was less about that and more about saying, how about these other two things that you are invested in, that you're not truly invested in, that can't save your life and won't make your life nearly as good, are just hobbies? What about you put them on the back burner and you replace one of those or two of those days with your days of jiu-jitsu? So that way she doesn't lose you for an extra little bit, right? Because that's what the underlying issue is here, not your BJJ. She doesn't know anything about BJJ, as you don't know anything about BJJ, and you're standing in a chair explaining to me why you shouldn't do it. And I'm looking at you going, you have no idea. You should definitely do it. But that is not what the conversation needed to be about. And so in order for you to understand what you have in front of you, understanding that what meets the eye is very rarely what meets the eye, and from the person that's sort of projecting that, understanding the fact that there is nothing wrong if you have a person in front of you that you trusted enough to open up on something and ask for an opinion or a question. There is nothing wrong about asking the right question. And I'm not suggesting, because in the case of this guy, for example, he hadn't even thought of that. So I'm not going to impose on him that he already knew that and just kind of hit it and anything like that, because that would imply nefarious behavior, and he wasn't. He just didn't think that deep about it, right? But I think not thinking deep enough is a societal issue. It's a humanity issue. It's an everything issue. And so and going too deep in rabbit holes that are not useful is also another issue. So you have to sort of navigate those two extremes. But it is really important before, say, reaching out to somebody, or before having a conversation with somebody, or before commenting on somebody's post, that we ask the question, like, what is it that I'm actually commenting on here? What is it that I'm suggesting? What is it that I believe? What is it that he actually is trying to say? And try to view it through the lens of compassion. I said that a million times before, rather than a nefarious, a self-imposed nefarious lens automatically. And what you're going to find out is your increased authenticity on these conversations or these contacts that you have with other human beings, which then leads to more authentic friendships, and even online. I mean, like we all met online, the three of us, and I would surmise we're brothers now, right? And this has been years in the making. But of course, had we had an attitude that this types of relationships cannot happen online, we wouldn't be here right now. But we had an open mind, and we just, turned out the way it did. But the only way that can happen is to have a level of self-awareness that is conducive to, at the very least, have an acceptable baseline authenticity. And as we get to know each other more and more, it's going to refine itself in doing so. So there's two things here that I really want to stress. Be mindful of what you're projecting on what you are seeing and hearing, on account of you may be missing the conversation altogether. And inversely, be mindful of what you are projecting in understanding what it is that you're asking and why you're asking it.
There's so much good here, and I hate to say this, but we're almost out of time because we could just there's so much we could jump in here too. One of my thoughts on this was that what the external perspective is not the skill set, it is the outcome, right? So in terms of sniping, which is a great example, when people look at a sniper, what they see is the ability to shoot, but that is such a small piece of sniping as a whole that if you walked up to somebody and was like, "Hey man, I heard you a sniper, that means you can shoot really good, can you teach me how to shoot?" And you'd be like, "Well, I mean, that's not really what sniping is." And the same thing with BJJ. They say, "Oh, well, how do I get out of this choke?" And it's like, well, you don't go there. You don't let yourself fall into that situation. Let's start at the beginning rather than at the end. Riding a horse is the same thing. It's like people see somebody on horseback and they're rolling through the hills and it looks all smooth and easy, but that is a large amalgamation of smaller skill sets that you've had to put into play with feeling and intention and understanding and mutual connection with another animal. Like there's so many things that just the initial outlook of what somebody else sees that has no context of, that looks like a simple procedure. Like podcasting is another one. Oh, well, yeah, you just get a mic and a camera, throw up on the computer, easy peasy. Let's get on. That's what I thought when I started, and I was wrong. But I believe that is one of the struggles, is that the view of it looks so simplistic. But until, as we always say, you get 27 levels down into the basement, subfloor level 68, well, now you're starting to see what the foundations are of those skill sets are built upon. Shaun, you got any thoughts before we jump into final thoughts?
Sure. So one of the great things about, you use the example of sniping. I was already a good shot before I joined the Army. As a kid in Grand Cache, I grew up hunting nearly every day. And I've already told the story, I won't repeat it here, but on day one of arriving at 1 PPCLI as a proper infantryman, we had a brigade-wide shoot, and I won it as a day oneer. And that's because I had learned how to shoot when I was 15, 16, 17 years old, out in the middle of the bush. And so that skill of shooting is correctly assigned to being a good sniper. But as you said, Chance, and as Seb has said, that pales in comparison to the totality of what it means to do that job. But then that job pales in comparison to the totality of my career. And then my career in the military pales in comparison to the totality of my other careers. And so all of these building blocks that you could quickly assign right down to the bottom level of, well, shooting pales in comparison to the totality of my life. Now I'm contrasting a single minor skill set to the totality of my life's focus, which is becoming a subject matter expert of life. And so having a conversation with someone, you can start at the bottom or you can start at the top and throw a conversation at them. And that will take the conversation in two different directions. And so that's for the person who's orating to decide which way that conversation probably should go. And that is a skill unto itself. Something else that you'd said, that Seb had said, and of course you reinforced, Chance, in respect to BJJ, is, and how we've all come together as friends on social media. First time I ever met Seb, he whooped my arse on the BJJ mats. And so, well, maybe he didn't whoop my arse, but he definitely took care of business. And so, but if I'd have shown up as I don't even know if I was a blue belt or a purple belt at that time. Whatever. I was whatever. I don't even know what belt I am right now, to be honest. If
What are
I'd have
belts
shown
even?
up, or what it even means, what does life mean? So if I'd have shown up on that session with Seb, meeting him for the first time, and I'd have been like all freaked out about my skill sets, and I'd been all freaked out about how he's going to judge me, and if I'd have been like all up in my head about worried of perception through skills, like the moment that we bump fists, if my life, my body of work, my quote unquote being a sniper labels, if they'd have all rested on those next few minutes, oh my goodness. But what a terrible way to live. That's not how I chose to live the moment. I chose to live it like, I am who I am. We'll figure this out. Let's see where it goes. Oh, this is fun. And I knew that like within 2-3 seconds. But, life is difficult, man. The more skills that you pick up, I don't want to blow past this point. The more skills you pick up, the harder it is to pretend that skills don't matter. The more totality you've got, the harder it is to just simply namaste it all away and dissolve your ego and pretend that you're just Flowy McFlowing through the universe without an identity or a label. It is hard. The balance is probably the hardest skill to achieve when it comes to the totality of your skills, I would say.
100%. Now we are just about 2 hours here. I just got to say thanks, guys. Seb, Shaun, this has been awesome. we went down a number of rabbit holes, but any final thoughts? Anything still bubbling on the back of your brain? Seb, what do you got?
I have to comment on this, man. What a beach ball that was. I mean, just a fantastic inject. And ultimately, I already have written 2 words, humble ourselves, right? And this is where the risk is as you are developing these skills and you are getting good at various things and all the things, exactly as Shaun alluded to, we self-inflate our ego, which puts us in a position to have to deflate it, which is more difficult because we have more of it. So all of those things. But at the end of the day, there's a few mechanisms that we can really, really help ourselves in. That is to understand that a lot of the things that we engage in, there's a variety of things that are completely outside of our control that need to align for us to even be there. And so what is that? That's gratitude. That is gratitude for the thing, like the breath in my lungs. Like I wouldn't have been an operator if I didn't have breath in my lungs. But that morning I just woke up, whereas this other guy didn't. You think you did something? You did something special that made you, no, you didn't, right? And so I think that one of the quote unquote antidote to ego inflation is gratitude. And that's constant. It's not just a keyword or a buzzword. This is real. There's a lot of you that's completely based on luck, and a lot of things that's completely based on other factors that you perhaps may or may not have any control over whatsoever. And you are there taking all the credit for all the things that you've done. And, the fact that your mom had conversations with you as a kid that made you eloquent at 8, that makes you a good conversationalist today, and somehow you think you did something special. No, what happens is the person that's in the chair now somewhere else didn't have the luxury of, say, their mom having the conversations with them at all times. So you can easily deconstruct yourself without falling into self-deprecation or in counterproductive deconstruction, if that makes any sense. It's a healthy deconstruction that leads to a humbler self, rather than a deconstruction that lead to I'm worth nothing and I should probably die, because that's a trap that we can easily fall into as well. And as humans, we have a predisposition for pride. That is one of the things that we fight consistently. And so that is the reason why we have external validation needs. That's the reason why we do things a certain way, and a certain amount of pride isn't negative. Too much of it, too much ego is the problem. And so as long as we are aware, is the first step to having some level of management over that.
I love it. There's I wrote down here, this is the line that you love to say, is the totality of the circumstances. But gratitude is what gives you an understanding of the totality of the circumstances in my mind. And that is a critical piece. I love that you brought that up. Shaun, you got any final thoughts?
I do. I'm loving that you brought up gratitude, since it is a key element of the last part of chapter 3, which we just finished. So, gratitude, if you really want to dive into gratitude in a way that you've never understood before, buy the book. And I'm not even kidding, because, we're talking about, well, just try gratitude, just try this, just try that. You know what? A few years ago, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do these things. I was doing them. I just didn't know how to do them as deeply as I do them now. I didn't know how to do them as well as I do now. I've kind of had to learn, and I've kind of had to be taught. But I've had to focus, like with intention, on learning how to do all of these things better. Gratitude, as an example. And so if you're like me, as I was a few years ago, if you're like me and you're wondering how to do these things better, like, you can take the time to learn. You can take the time to talk to your friends and listen to your friends and spend your life figuring it out. But you can also turn to resources like a book. And I'm saying, when this book comes out, you'll be able to find some answers on these subjects, as we've talked about today, that will resonate with you, which will embed within you to help you out on just this subject. I think, as we talk about these things, we're talking about areas that not a lot of people talk about amongst their friends. And so I believe that the book also does that. And so people who are curious about what we've been talking about today will want more. This conversation did not fill in all the gaps. And so I'm encouraging people, as a pre-idea, to start thinking about the book that we're going to release in the future.
And on that, nothing will fill in all the gaps. That's on us to fill in the gaps with all of our different experiences and different skill sets and different engagements in life. Because as good as we can get it from a book, from a podcast, from a TV show, from a movie, from a friend, whatever it is, it still comes back to our own experience. And we have to be able to then take that information and apply it to our own experience, and then see what happens. And that therein lies the skill paradox, in the fact that we can't gain skills until we realize we need the skills, until then we have to go learn the skills, and it just cycles back into itself, like Seb was saying. So I just love it. I don't have
learn, build, and grow.
That's it. We could just learn, build, and grow. We'll see y'all next week.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going.